Hello and welcome to another episode of the Jim Powell Report. I'm your host, Jim Powell, and for 14 years we've been producing shows here at MVTV that have been interesting and opened awareness to issues here on Martha's Vineyard. And today's show is explosive and so interesting that I hope you'll pay attention to the entire show very carefully, because we have an author and guest here today, Bill Pinney, who's written the book Chappaquiddick Speaks, and a witness from the actual events the night of July 19th, 1969, Carol Jones. They're with us here today in MVTV studios to talk about the explosive book Chappaquiddick Speaks. Bill, it's great to have you here today.
Very nice to be here, Jim. Thanks.
Really an honor. And Carol, good to see you too.
Thank you.
And lifelong residents of Chappaquiddick.
Yep.
And I think our guests are really our viewers are going to really enjoy listening to you today. So you've written this book.
Yeah, I started writing it when my wife, who was recently Brazilian, recently introduced to Chappaquiddick, started asking me questions about the accident. And I thought, well, for sure the accident has been solved by now. So I went on the internet and I started reading books and finding out what the books were, and found to my surprise that it hadn't been solved. And I've been a lifelong resident on Chappaquiddick, spending these summers in Chappaquiddick, winters in Eggertown. And my family dates back to the 1800s in Chappaquiddick. We have a very large family. Carol here is one of my cousins. And
I've been connected to the Jones family for over 30 years in Chappie.
Right.
But you also have a great professional background as a reporter,
yes,
haven't you?
I was an investigative reporter for the Times, the Sunday Times of London, in South America, and I own my own newspaper in South America, the English language newspaper of that country, a large circulation magazine in Canada, various other newspapers and magazines. And so investigative reporting and publishing was really my profession. And
you've received great reviews on your book, Chappaquiddick Speaks, from the New York Times Magazine Group, the Department of Physics at UMass Boston, and from the actual jury foreman of the actual hearings that were held in Edgartown.
Yeah, this book is different than any other produced because we have a witness, which was my cousin Carol. And when she had told me what she had seen a long time ago, but I just never taken any interest specifically about it. There were more interesting things to do on Chappaquiddick, like sailing, and which I'm very involved in. So, but I got together with Carol and we decided to hear over again because she said she had heard something interesting.
And on we're on the eve of the 50th anniversary of the Chappaquiddick case.
That's correct. And of course, all this happened when I started getting interested 5 years ago. So at this point, it wasn't even a thought that this was coming up as far as being an anniversary. It was the idea that I suddenly thought I had the chance to solve it. Both of us are very, very familiar with Chappaquiddick. All the other authors that have written other books, none of them are from here. We have one, Donald Nelson, who's a summer visitor. Has recently written a book, but we're the only ones from Chappaquiddick. So we thought we'd have a chance to solve it. And it was interesting because, and I'll let Carol tell her story of what she saw, but I wrote the book in a summer. It took me one summer to write it, and I brought it around to various people that I thought would give me a good insight as to whether this would be a book people would believe. Plausible. And both of them read it, and to my surprise, they weren't convinced. And I said, well, we have witnesses, and all the evidence now fits, all the extraneous pieces that everybody's been trying to figure out how they fit in, suddenly fit in. And I was convinced that my theory was correct. But these weren't. They said, oh, just another second on the second shooter on the hill conclusion. Right. So I said, okay, what happens if I took this around to a forensic as an accident specialist? I'll find the best I can in the world. If he can prove it, would you be convinced? One of them said yes. The other one said maybe. I said, okay. And I realized I had a chance to prove this because there was forensic evidence. And so his investigation the first thing he said to me is that I'm going to prove otherwise, because the forensic evidence can either prove it or disprove it, in this case, as far as your theory. And he said, I'm convinced I'm going to. And what are you going to do when I prove that it couldn't have happened that way? And I said, well, abandon the book. And I can't put out a book that's, that's proven otherwise.
Right.
Even though I had already read it. But I said, I'm convinced it's true, so we'll just put the money where my mouth is and go ahead and analyze it. And it took him 2 years to do it. And along the way, we came across a whole treasure trove of new accident scene photographs that had never been published before, of actually the inspectors, and Chief Arena and Inspector Kennedy, no relation, who was inspector of motor vehicles. And we have them actually measuring the tire marks, right on the bridge. All these photographs of the accident scene damage, the bridge, everything. Never before published, never before seen by anybody.
Right.
And that was convinced the investigator. He immediately said, this is now proven.
And now in 2018, you have access to higher tech software and accident recreation.
All this was done not only to prove the theory. We actually experimented on a Delmont 88, Kennedy's car. We actually ran that up bridge slopes, across the rub rail. We actually recreated it to prove it. The skid marks can only be interpreted one way, and they prove the theory. The theory is one that we did not invent. It was two books that came out with that theory, and that theory is now a proven fact. In fact, in the book, we ask anybody to see if they can look at these 3 smoking guns we put in there and try to find an alternative explanation, or as to what this evidence shows, or to disprove it of some particular way. And if they can't, it's a given.
In your book, you talk about these 3 main points. Could you just clearly outline them? What are the 3 points?
The 3 points in the book are the 3 smoking guns are, 1, the impact analysis. When the car went over the bridge, it landed partially on its windshield, partially on its side. It caved in the doors of the car, and it crushed the windshield. And so every accident specialist until now, and every author, has assumed that the impact on the water, caused this damage. And you'd think that the obvious thing to do at that point is to compute, to see if that's correct. Compute the actual force that would be transmitted to the doors from landing flat, perhaps, on water. Dead flat would give the highest possible impact force. And then to analyze the actual strength of the doors and the windshield to see if that is correct. But nobody has ever done that before. And so we did. And
now we have the technology to
be able to do that. We have the technology, yes. And we found that it would take a force many times, 13.5 times as much force on an impact on water to cause that damage. And then it had to be explained. That's smoking gun number 1. The second one is the tire marks. The tire marks cannot possibly, by any stretch of the imagination, have been caused by a braking vehicle. And the tire marks prove beyond any doubt, and we've had it analyzed by every accident specialist that we can find since then, and they all agree. The car was accelerated up the bridge from a standing start, 1 car length from the start of the bridge. The tire marks can be only explained by an accelerating vehicle. And this disproves everything, because Kennedy said he braked on the vehicle, and of course they're talking about acceleration from a standing start, not something as it was in motion. That implies intent. The only other possibility is he was drunk and he pressed the wrong pedal in error, but in order to do that, he'd have to keep the pedal pegged to the floor for over 50 feet, pegged to the floor, in order to create the skid marks, with the skid marks of the tires actually burning rubber as it went up the bridge. So again, we have, and since we've done this, we experimented actually on a Delmont 88 to prove this. It took my accident specialist just 15 seconds to say these could only be acceleration marks. And so that's proved in the book by actually showing the marks, by showing the photographs, and which are completely at odds with the accident scene diagrams that were produced by Inspector Kennedy and by Chief Arena, which they're fake. They're just basically made up. They were made up to support Kennedy's story that he braked on the bridge. You can prove this because we actually,
over the hill,
yeah,
and there was the bridge.
And so it didn't happen that way. And in fact, there's a question of why Chief Arena and Inspector Kennedy faked their diagrams, which is another story entirely. That's another mystery, perhaps. The third one is the absence of any visible injury to Kennedy or Mary Jo. When the car went into the water, and this was done by experiments with a vehicle, scaled models, going over the water and revolving upside down in the water. If you think of a car 18 feet long, which is what Kennedy's car was, and that water depth where the car came to rest was only 6.5 feet. So you have a car 18 feet long going into the water front first. And what happens when that happens, if it comes out at an angle like this, is the water pushes up around its center of mass. And as it goes into the water, and you've got all that considerable weight of the car pushing down, there's a torque that's created like this, and it comes down and it smashes the roof and windshield hard against the sand. That caused the roof and windshield damage, absolutely obliterated the windshield. When that occurred, the passengers were unrestrained. Any passengers in the front seat were unrestrained. And as it hit the water, they would have hit the glass as it rolled over and then smashed in the bottom with a force, tremendous force, able to crush the windshield and crush in the roof.
Right.
And this means that nobody could have been in the car. Nobody was in the car. The car was accelerated over the bridge from the standing start with nobody in it. We also have pictures of the driver's side mirror. The driver's side mirror on that side of the car had no damage whatsoever, not even a scratch, and yet the mirror was ripped off coming back. The car was dragged out of the water on its roof for a little while and then flipped over. If it had been dragged over and the mirror had broken off, it would have been the rear fastener that broke off. But in this case, it was the front. And this was because the steering wheel was tied off to the driver's side mirror in order to keep the car straight as it was accelerated over the side. And then Mary Jo was inserted into the car afterwards. There's no other way, plausible way. Dr. Cross, who analyzed this, many, many scores of accidents for the New South Wales police. There's no way that could not have created the force of what it would be with a body without extreme damage, if not major damage, skull fractures, etc., to the head, to the face going into shattered glass. Neither Kennedy nor Mary Jo had the slightest injury. Mary Jo, the only injury they could ever find on her was a slight abrasion on a left-hand knuckle.
Wow.
That was it. And so those are the three smoking guns. And when you look at it, and especially the tire marks, and you realize it cannot possibly, when it's pointed out to you, be a braking car.
Wow.
You realize that the accident was staged. It was a stage to, but that brings up my witness's sighting who got me into this thing, because what she saw, the only thing that could suggested to me that the accident was staged, and that's why I decided to either prove it or disprove it.
Wow, Bill, that's fascinating. Now, you talked about the who and the what. Now let's talk a little bit about the when. When Carol comes into this story.
Right. Well, I was on Chappaquiddick that night, and my boyfriend at the time was taking a bicycle trip across the country with another mutual friend of his and mine. And his parents were renting the Martin House on Chappaquiddick.
The Martin House,
yeah.
Okay.
Which is, today, if you know where the Chappie store is, it's not too far from the Chappie store.
Right.
On the main road, too.
We'll show a map here of the roads and where the Martin House is and the bridge.
Yeah, so back in those days, people used pay telephones and generally would call collect, and you would be told, I'm going to call you at a certain time to make sure you were home. And so the parents of Chris Casey, who was traveling on a bike with my boyfriend, said, would you like to come over at 11:15 on this night
11:15.
Yeah, he's going to call.
July
and
19th,
yes,
1969.
July 18th.
July 18th.
18th.
Yeah.
That's right, July 18th, 1969.
Yeah, 1969. And you can get a few minutes in talking to your boyfriend. And I said, fantastic.
So you had to be very precise
Yeah.
about lining up, so you knew what time.
Oh, absolutely.
And the operator knew what time it was.
Yeah, precisely, yeah. So my parents were away, and I had their VW bus, the microbus. And anyway, so I drove over to the house, and I was there at 11:15, took the call, and hung around for, a few minutes after the call. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to go home because it's getting late anyway.
And you wouldn't have been on the phone for too long.
No, because it was very expensive and it was collect. And
You were just checking in.
yeah, just to say hi. Anyway, so I was leaving the Martin house. It was 11:35 by the time we were done with all the calls and everything. And I thought about going down to East Beach, which is the beach on the other side of the Dyke Bridge.
Just opposite the bridge.
Yeah. Because it's a beautiful beach, and I was, just thinking about my boyfriend and, how I missed
Maybe
him.
there was a beautiful moon that night.
Well, actually,
No,
there
was
wasn't.
no moon. It's
No
pitch
moon.
black.
Oh,
That's
there was
that's
no
a fiction
moon.
of
Yeah.
the movie. That's
It
There
was
was
very
no moon.
dark.
no, it's absolutely no moon.
Yeah,
Very
that,
dark. Yeah.
That could be checked historically.
Yes.
Yeah, it's in the book.
Yeah, so anyway, I pulled out of the Martin house driveway, and my house was to the right. The Chappie Ferry was to the left, okay? So I'm going right out of the driveway onto Chappaquiddick Road to go towards my house. And no one was coming. I didn't expect anybody on the road at that hour, really. So as I pulled out, I'm going rather slowly, and all of a sudden a car is like right on me with the lights. And I thought, wow, where did that car come from? And it was coming from the Chappie Ferry. And so I was like, whoa, that's too bad, whatever. But instead of slowing down and staying behind me, they decided to pass me.
Wow.
And the road was twisty right there.
Yeah.
It does some turns. And I thought, oh my God, these guys are insane. What if a car's coming, or there's somebody on a bicycle, because people rode bikes back then, all hours.
Yeah, it was unsafe.
Yeah, right, it was a narrow road. Anyway, so I'm thinking this, and then they pulled it back in front of me after they passed me. And because I had a VW bus, the lights were up high, because this was a sedan that was in front of me. It was a white sedan. And the lights shone in the back very clearly. And there were 3 people in the back seat. 2 men in white shirts. Squished in between was a woman with very short hair. And she was like this, and they were, squished in the back. So we were getting close to the big turn.
Yes.
That goes towards the Lawrence Cottage, where they
You have
had
to
been
make a
at.
decision
Yeah.
whether to go left or right.
Well, you have to slow down to make the turn. It's an actual right turn, really, where the road goes. And as we're getting close to that turn, I thought, oh my God, they are going so fast. There's no way they're going to make the turn. And then sure enough, they went straight down the Dyke Road. I'm making the turn. And I thought, they didn't even brake or pretend that they might be turning right. They went deliberately straight down the road. And I thought, well, that is very strange, right? And of course I went on home, and the next day.
You heard what happened.
Yeah.
So you were able to, from your own perspective, and what you saw, were there were 2 men and a woman in the back seat of a dark car.
It was
No,
a
light-
light
white-
car.
White
white-
car.
Yeah,
White
it was
car.
light.
White car. Huh?
Yeah.
With a large squared off rear window, Carol told me.
Yeah.
And so basically, when I heard that, when we were discussing, I was thinking, how could that fit in? Because this happened at 11:35 p.m.
Right.
Carol remembers looking at the clock when she went out, and it was 11:35 when that happened. 11:30 when she went out. But then Huck, look, saw the Oldsmobile at 12:40 a.m. And this was at 11:35 p.m. And the only car that could really have been going down that road, because Kennedy always said the accident occurred right to the day of the death, always did, in Gargan and Markham, one of which was Kennedy's cousin, who was with Kennedy that evening, who apparently dove in the car and helped him get back to the ferry. They all maintained that the accident occurred soon after 11:15 p.m. And Carol saw this car going down at 11:35 p.m. But then Huck Look saw the Oldsmobile at 12:40. The car that she saw could only really have been the rented white Valiant that was rented by the party that night. So how could that fit in? And I thought, you know, if I had been in that car instead of Carol, and I saw a car pass me at extreme speed like that, you're talking about 45 to 50 miles an hour, and then actually pass somebody, which is unheard of in Chappaquiddick in those days, or even now. Pass, the first thought that would have crossed my mind is there had been an accident of some kind. Maybe there was a heart attack, you know, somewhere in a house down there. Maybe someone had drowned. I would have gone after there to see if I could help. And back in those days, even now, the thought that a crime had occurred or that these people were on a nefarious mission would never have occurred to me. I would have gone down to help. At least to me, it would have suggested that they were on the way to save a life. So I started thinking, well, maybe the car had gone over the bridge before that time, or at that time, you know, just before that time. But then the car was seen later on. But then what if there had been an accident on Dyke Road, a previous accident? Because this was brought up in a book called Chappaquiddick Revealed by Kenneth Capel. He had an accident specialist also look at the damage. And this is way back many years ago. And he came up with the idea that the accident was staged, that there had been a previous accident, that basically these doors and the windshield could never have occurred from the impact on water, just as my accident specialist surmised. And that it was staged to make it appear as if Mary Jo drove off the car alone and Kennedy was kept out of it. And in other words, the accident occurred on Dyke Road. They brought the car back, hidden out of sight, and then both cars, after the Valiant and also the Oldsmobile, back to Lawrence Cottage, and then it went down to the bridge to stage the accident, at which time it was seen by Huck Look. So that was the theory that I could imagine if you accept that her observation and Huck Look's observation, that both of them are tenable, and they're both telling the proof. That's what it seemed to be assumed. But then I realized I had the chance to either prove it or disprove it from the forensic evidence, and that's what we've done.
In Chappaquiddick Speaks. Well, and I can ask the question, I wonder if there might be a second witness or another person that's been worried about coming forward and telling the truth. I know you've had great concern. We know that very powerful forces in world politics, national politics, were involved. Or whether you see the movie Chappaquiddick or you read any of the books, we know that the people that helped put John F. Kennedy in office and helped the Kennedy family, Joe Kennedy, were involved in part of the alibi, and that a reasonable person would fear for their life and want to be quiet and lay low for a while. And I know that myself, being involved in politics, have seen some interesting things.
Yeah. So the reason I never came forward was because when I, of course, decided not to go down to the beach that night when I saw that car go down there, because I didn't know who they were. So I was more scared of who they might be than anything. So I went home. But the next day and a few days after, when we found out about all of what happened, my grandmother's caretaker told me that her cousin worked for the Kennedys in Hyannisport, and or Hyannis, and said to tell me not to say anything because the Kennedys would kill me.
So you were told that.
So I was only 17, and I only told very close friends or family members. I never ever told anyone of, you know, that might report it or get me involved.
Well, it's good that you're coming forward now to help shed light and to try to bring the truth forward.
Yeah.
Because as we look at all the different things that are going on in politics today, not just in our own country, but around the world, but specifically in our own country, there are people who are arguing one point or the other, who's covering up, and what we really want is the truth.
Yeah.
Right.
And
I think one of the things that people will find interesting in this book is that as a former investigative reporter, I've been able to uncover so much new information. This is just a fraction of it, in terms of being able to interview people that have never been interviewed before for this book. I've been able to uncover all the telephone calls that's never been been done before. All the telephone calls actually made on Kennedy's credit card, and to describe them. And we want to make it clear to the audience out there that both Carol and I are Democrats. We're liberal Democrats. And for this book is not kind to Kennedy. The conclusion is not kind. However, the forensic evidence is irrefutable. It just cannot be disputed.
it's the truth.
It's the truth, and it can only be interpreted one way. It's not only proves the staged accident theory, it disproves every possible theory that has been imagined until now, including the possibility that Kennedy told the truth. Every one of the three smoking guns, just by itself, disproves every other theory. And so I think that if you're a person like me, especially a Democrat, you have to look at this. The event is political just by its nature, just because of the principle involved.
Right.
However, in order to look at the evidence fairly, you have to keep politics out of it. Otherwise, you just can't. You get mired in that conundrum.
And that issue right there is what we need to have in Washington. We need to have a political approach to the truth. And when you look at it, what came out of Chappaquiddick, which was, we can focus all our attention on that. But what happened was, because 20 years later, Senator Kennedy ran for president in 1980, but then later on, the Kennedy family endorsed Barack Obama instead of Hillary Clinton.
True.
Major schism. We can see how these moves in supporting and world power brokers in the political world can change the destiny, and only truth can cut through. And thank goodness for computers. Thank goodness for your book. I wish we could have more time to talk about these details.
There is one thing I'd like to say.
Yes.
That we are giving a presentation, book signing and presentation and question and answer. We'll take one of these smoking guns, mainly the photographic evidence, and present it there and explain how that fits in. And that will take place at the Chappaquiddick Community Center on August 30th at 6:30.
6:30?
6:30 p.m. at the Chappaquiddick Community Center on August 30th, Thursday. So everybody is invited, and hopefully there'll be a good raucous crowd that everybody will try to dispute everything we're saying, but that's fair enough.
Yes, that's great.
And but we can at least present it and explain why we feel this is important.
Bill, thank you very much. Carol, thank you for being here.
Thanks.
And for actually trying to shed some more light and truth, to lead to the truth. We appreciate that. Okay. Thanks for being on the show. Hope to see you at the community center in Chappaquiddick. And thank you, viewers, for watching this episode. We've been talking with Bill Pinney and Carol Jones about the book Chappaquiddick Speaks, which sheds more light on the 49th anniversary of the Chappaquiddick case. And hope you'll stay tuned, as we'll have more reports in the future. Thank you so much for watching. Bye now.